In the American West, you lived fast and died young. And one man who epitomizes this fatalistic saying has a name that has passed into legend. Soapy Smith, an infamous gangster and con artist of the late 1800s. Feared for his quick and violent anger, he lived a wild and lawless life. Shot dead at only 37 years of age. His name has lived long in the history and culture of the American frontier. So notorious, in fact, that he has featured on the silver screen in movies such as Klondike Fever, portrayed by Rod Steiger, and in fiction and festivals to this day. Today, we take a look at the notorious life and crimes of Soapy Smith, how he grew his kingdom of outlaws from small-time cons on street corners that would see him acquire his unusual name, to a crime empire in the city of Denver. We will focus on events that led to him forced out to the booming mining town of Creede, Colorado, and share the story of a newspaper reporter who headed out to this lawless community to interview Smith. Not only does the reporter describe how unsuspecting miners lost their money to Soapy Smith and his gang, but he records an incredible word-for-word conversation of a game with Smith and players in a Creede gambling den, where a heated exchange over a game of faro with an overconfident miner seeking to cheat the cheater, but who still gets hustled, nearly ends in gunfire. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. Born in 1860 in Georgia into a wealthy family, his father was an attorney and grandfather a plantation owner. The American Civil War ruined the family. So, in 1876, they sought a new start in Round Rock, Texas. It was here that Jefferson Randolph Smith fell into crime and began his career as a confidence man, forming a group of shills and thieves. Smith's gang of swindlers, known as the Soap Gang, included Texas Jack Vermillion and Big Ed Burns. They used short cons, games which are quick and easy to pull off, to dupe people, including the shell game and three-card Monte, where a mark or victim is asked to bet which shell or card, after being shown by the dealer, is one of three face down. In reality, through sleight of hand, the dealer has palmed it away, and there is no chance of it being found and anyone but the dealer winning. He also rigged poker games, which he called the Big Mitt. He got his name, Soapy, because of a little business he used to drive in Denver, the state capital, which newspapers called the Prize Soap Racket. He would take a number of square bits of soap, wrap them in soft paper, enclosing in some, but not in all, $5, $10, $20, and $50 bills, then displaying his soap on street corners for a sum of money fixed by himself. He would allow any man in the audience to guess which of the little packages had money. However, through sleight of hand, he would ensure that only members of his gang purchased prize soap. These shills would buy a bar, tear it open, and loudly proclaim to the crowd that they had won a prize, which, when there were few bars left and prizes still hypothetically to be claimed, would kick off a bidding war, earning even more money for nothing. On one occasion, Smith was arrested for running this confidence racket. While writing in his notebook, the police officer forgot Smith's name and wrote Soapy. The sobriquet stuck, and he became known as Soapy Smith. He earned his title King of the Frontier Conmen because he was able to establish a crime empire by turning up in Denver in 1882, influencing politicians and the police to the extent that he didn't have to continually move on like other criminals. By 1887, despite his activities being widely reported in newspapers, he was able, by a combination of force and bribes, to avoid prosecution and control the city's gambling and criminal underworld. Arrests were merely an inconvenience, since Smith or members of his gang could obtain quick releases from friends, attorneys, and associates in high places. He remained untouchable, even after an electoral fraud trial resulted in the mayor losing his job and, at the same time, brought publicity to corruption and payoffs. Smith had his hands dirty running all sorts of operations to fleece people from money, besides saloons and gambling. These included fraudulent lottery shops, a sure thing stock exchange, which were anything but a guaranteed success, fake watch and diamond auctions, and the sale of stocks in non-existent businesses. In 1888, Smith opened the Tivoli Club as a saloon and gambling house. It is said that a sign reading "Caveat emptor" or "Buyer beware" was hung above the entrance to gambling games. An amusing warning, the irony of which was no doubt largely ignored by players. Boscombe Smith, his younger brother, joined the gang to run a cigar store as a front for dishonest poker games and other swindles from its back rooms. Smith sold up in 1892 and moved out of town against a political atmosphere of increasing prosecutions that sought to clean up saloons and gambling. He settled in a place ripe for crime to take hold, an isolated gulch in Willow Creek without any government and, due to a blunder by state officials, no man's land belonging to no county or town, run by a vigilance committee that could dispense justice for personal gain as they please. Creede was the name of this Colorado boomtown, which, following a rich discovery of silver in 1889, saw its population rise from 600 that year to 10,000 by the end of 1891. It brought miners and merchants, but it lured more than honest men too, desperados, conmen, thieves, fallen women and opportunists who got rich by preying on gullible miners and foolish adventurers, or tenderfeet, from the east, all engaged in a wild scramble for money. Miners housed themselves in tent cities known as camps, equally as dangerous for your lawless neighbours as they were for the steep canyon walls behind. Soapy Smith saw an opportunity. Denver was experiencing a reform movement against gambling clubs and saloons. So many of their owners relocated to Creede, including Smith, who, with the opening of the Orleans Club, soon became the uncrowned king of Creede's gambling paradise and criminal underworld. This was a place where saloon brawls and killings of betting stake jumpers were frequent. Robert Ford, the man who killed outlaw Jesse James, was also in the town, having set up with Smith after being driven out of Missouri. He was later killed by Ed O'Kelly in Creede, along with William Sidney, Cap Light, the first deputy sheriff of Creede, and brother-in-law of Soapy Smith, and Bat Masterson, the famous gambler and frontiersman. And this is the scene into which a newspaper reporter entered Creede in 1892, just before the price of silver collapsed the following year with the 1893 repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, bringing the mining boom and Smith's second criminal empire to an end. This is a story of how he met Soapy Smith. 1,000 burden burros, donkeys used as pack animals, filled the narrow, winding, wriggling trail. 100 settlers came to build, each day, new houses in the vale. 100 gamblers came to feed on the same settlers. That was Creede. Slanting Annie, Gambling Joe, and Bad Bob Ford, Sapolio, or Soapy Smith, as he was known, ran games peculiarly their own, for everything was open wide, and men drank absinthe on the side. This was the running record of Creede Camp as set down at the time, A.D. 1892. With a press franchise, a force of printers, a lead pencil and a power press, the writer had gone to the booming camp to establish a morning paper with a telegraph service, in a town that had been in existence but 3 short moons and was not yet definitely located on the maps. In a little bushless spot by the roadside was a board shanty upon the door of which was tacked a tin beer sign. Inside 6 working men, labourers or miners, they might be, were sitting on wooden benches about the stove. They had been in animated conversation, but hushed it as they noted the entrance of a newcomer. One small man with pale, lustreless hair and cold grey eyes was recognisable as Tom, the Shell Man. Troublesome Tom, they called him. I had seen a carpenter pause at Tom's three-legged stool that day, watch the game for a moment, then slowly slide his tool bag from his shoulder to the ground, put $5 on the table and pounce upon one of the shells. He lost this 5 and 2 more, called the shellman a thief, and demanded his money back. "Yes," said the man, with his cold eyes fixed upon the top of the mountain. "I presume that's what you wanted with my money, to give it back." Now the carpenter was pushed aside by a man who could guess. This man was able to win 3 times out of 5. Seeing that the game could be beaten, a merchant from Denver put down 10, tried again, and lost. Crumpling a $50 bill in his left hand, the merchant watched the 2 half-shells for a moment, and then made a grab. "Turn it over! Turn it over!" he demanded excitedly, dropping the crumpled bill. Tom turned it over, but there was nothing in it, nothing for the merchant. "Why didn't you turn it yourself?" said a man with a southern accent and a full black beard. "That fellow's a shark." Now this same man with a Georgia pronunciation came from behind the pine bar and spoke to me. He had no whiskers, but I could swear that this was the man that had helped the merchant play off the 100. "You're that artist that's going to start the daily paper, eh?" "Yes," I answered. "Going to make war on the gamblers?" asked the man. "Not for gambling." "What for then?" "Sandbags, 6-shooters and masks," was the reply. "Well, sir, if that's your gait, we can gallop in the same heat," said he, enthusiastically, offering me his hand. "My name is Smith, Soapy Smith, and when you're in trouble, say so, and I'll help you." That is the way we became acquainted. Gambler Joe Simmons, one of Soapy's working men, died suddenly 2 days before the first issue of the Chronicle, and Soapy gave him a big funeral. Standing at the open grave, he opened champagne, pouring some into the grave, and drank some, saying as he did so, "Here's to Joe's soul over there, if there is any over there," and passed the bottle to his next friend. The description of that funeral, which Hartigan wrote for the first issue, gave the Chronicle a start, and made it welcome at the exchange table before it was 2 days old. It's a mistake to assume that gamblers do no good. Joe Simmons helped make the Chronicle. One day a man came over from Chalk Creek to burn a lot of money that he had just received for a group of claims. At dusk, when he entered the Chronicle office, his trousers were stuffed like the trousers of a football player, stuffed with money. His face was flushed and his eyes dancing. He was a miner by profession, a gambler by instinct, and a deep drinker. He told Tabor frankly that he had expected a reporter would find him out at the hotel, but seeing the paper was shy on enterprise, he had come in to give up the news of the Chalk Creek district. He hinted that seeing his name repeated in the paper would help him over at the new camp where he was mayor, magistrate, postmaster, and notary public. "If that likeness could go on the first page," he said, sliding a photograph over to the reporter, "I'd be willing to pay for the cut." He offered to open wine for the gang, printers and all, if they would join him at the Albany for a midnight feed. In the twilight of the following day he called again. He was not nearly so frisky. The stuffing was gone from his trousers and the twinkle from his eye. Pulling a chair up to the reporter's desk, he began to pour out the story of his undoing. Hartigan, seeing a smile beginning to play about the smooth face of the reporter, went over to give Tabor an assignment, and Vaughan, the master mechanic and general manager in the editor's absence, came in from the back room. Half an hour later the man went out. "Say," he called from the back door, "you don't need to mention names, but I'll stand by the paper if you give the outfit a good roast." Tabor had written the heading for the exposé in the presence of the Chalk Creeker, and he had cheered and applauded it. When he picked up the paper on the following morning, he was delighted to see that it had not been changed or softened. "Conspiracy, a deep-laid plot to do a man of money. Businessmen to form a union to protect themselves against the sharks." And there was the miner's likeness on the front page, top of the column and right up against pure reading matter. The miner had admitted, in the interview, that he had been in the habit of bucking the tiger to gamble on a game of faro at the Orleans Club, kept by one Sapolio Smith, and that he had dropped several small wads there. Finally, one of his men up at the mines, who used to deal faro at El Paso, said he could beat Soapy's game, but it would take time and money, For $500 to him in hand paid, this Texas man would go down to Creede, get a job dealing at the club, and allow his friend to break the bank. It was so simple and easy that the miner, finding himself healed, gave the Texas man the money, and the man got the job. He could deal brace, conceal cheating, and down came the tin horn, a person who pretends to have money, influence, or ability, to tap the till. The Texas man was honest, but Soapy, looking in the mirror, saw the new man fooling with the box, and when the game opened had another switched in. At first the Chalk Creek man lost heavily, but he cared no more for his money than the Texas man did for his life, and laughed as he unloaded. His roll wad half gone before he won a bet. Now he left off joking and began to watch the dealer. In a little while his money was flowing into the till again, and he began to double up. There was no improvement. The miner hitched a 6-shooter around so the Texas man could see it, and the Texas man's mouth began to twitch. Reaching into a drawer, the dealer lifted a revolver and laid it near his right hand. "I call you," said he, in a voice soft and low, and without much ado the Chalk Creek man reached for his gun. Instantly Soapy was between them. "Oh, gentlemen, said he. The two men put away their guns. A new dealer took the chair, and the game went on. Soapy signed to the Texas man to approach the bar. "Here's $100 for your week's work. Get a drink and a cigar and take the trail to Texas." "Why? What's up, Soapy?" Nothing much. Only if you're here when that sucker goes broke, he'll kill you. He thinks you've been robbing him. And if you haven't, you've been crooked with me. And in that case, the rules of the house make it my duty to put your light out myself. See?" A few minutes later, a cigar went burning along the trail that lay by the banks of the Rio Grande. That, in substance, was the story told by the miner, verified by Sapolio, and printed in the Morning Chronicle. Smith returned to Denver later that year, having been tipped off by corrupt city officials that gambling restrictions were due to end. He had a lucky break, as not only did prices for silver crash, but most of Creede's buildings were destroyed in a fire on 5th of June 1892, along with the Orleans Club. Soapy was soon back to his old tricks, buying up businesses as fronts for short cons and rigged games. Power and influence went to his head. He was once said to have told a reporter, "I consider bunco steering, cheating money from people, more honourable than the life led by the average politician." In 1894, the newly elected governor of Colorado sought the introduction of more anti-corruption measures, including the dismissal of 3 Denver officials, in what later became known as the City Hall War. They refused to leave and fortified themselves in Denver City Hall. Smith and his men, armed with rifles and dynamite, joined up with them, and he was commissioned as a deputy sheriff after Governor Waite called on the state militia to remove them by force, bringing up 2 cannons and 2 Gatling guns. The militia was eventually stood down, with the argument carried on in the Supreme Court, where it was ruled that the commissioners could be replaced. Governor Waite then ordered the closure of the city's gambling dens, saloons and bordellos. Incredibly, Smith even found a way to exploit these shackles to his criminal empire in order to make money. Using the powers given to him as sheriff, he made fake arrests at his gambling houses on patrons who had lost large amounts of money. Victims were given a choice to walk away free instead of being arrested, if they agreed not to attempt to recoup their losses. Smith and his brother were later charged with attempted murder for the beating of a saloon manager. They were, by now, too well known to enjoy any more protection. His brother was jailed, but Smith escaped Colorado a wanted man. The Klondike Gold Rush of 1897 gave Smith his last chance at being boss of a criminal empire in Dyea and Skagway, Alaska. Like his operations in Creede, he put Skagway's deputy marshal on his payroll and collected over 100 ruffians to take over control. He set up all sorts of cunning schemes to fleece money from unsuspecting customers. Before the arrival of telephone lines in 1901, he opened a fake telegraph office where he obtained a fee for sending messages down wires that only went as far as the wall. His men became fake newspaper reporters, freight company representatives, or clergymen, merely to dupe new arrivals from their money. Strangers in town would be met at the dock and helped on their way to dishonest hotels, shipping companies that shipped nowhere, and gambling dens, or marked for robbery instead. He even had an army enlistment tent where the victim's clothes and possessions were stolen while a doctor gave him a physical. Jeff Smith's parlour was the name of the saloon from which he ran the town, known locally as the real City Hall, despite Skagway's existing municipal building. The building survives to this day. Smith cemented his hold over the town yet more when, in 1898, the Spanish-American War gave him reason to create a volunteer army called the Skagway Military Company, with himself as captain. Although the company obtained official recognition, it was used to strengthen his control of the town. On the 7th of July 1898, a miner, John Douglas Stewart, lost a bag of gold worth $2,700, estimated to be $82,620 in 2017, having been fleeced of it in a game of 3-card Monte in Jeff Smith's parlour at Skagway. The man didn't slink away beaten when asked to pay his losses, so the gang ran off with the money. Stewart didn't give up. He made a noise about it, getting the citizens together in a vigilante committee headed by Frank Reed, the city engineer. They demanded the money be returned, but Soapy said it was lost fairly and refused. Soapy got drunk and went out to fight them all. The next evening, arriving at the place where an indignation meeting, a citizens' committee, was being held, Soapy found 5 men guarding the entrance against gang members. So began what is known as the shootout on Juneau Wharf. Frank Reed stood up to Soapy, who rapped Reed over the head with a rifle. Reed snapped his pistol at Soapy, and Soapy shot him in the groin, a wound to which he succumbed 12 days later. Standing on one foot, Reed fired 3 bullets, one into Soapy's heart, a second into a left thigh, and one that grazed an arm. Testimonies vary, and it may have been another member of the vigilante committee that fired the fatal bullet to the heart. What we do know is that the standoff with Soapy's gang members, following up behind Soapy, ended with them fleeing in the wake of his death, only to be rounded up later by the committee when they took control of the town. Soapy Smith's last words were said to have been, "My God, don't shoot." Today, his grave lies several yards outside Skagway Cemetery. He lived altogether nearly 40 years, made many friends, and just about as many enemies.